Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our Questions and Answers show. Today is Thursday, May the 9th, bright and early this morning. Ready to answer your questions. I picked a handful or so of them from the last week or so, and we're going to tackle them one at a time. I picked out some of the coolest ones that I think they'll make for some interesting kind of commentary here. So let's get started with a question from Tate Davis. Tate says, "Hello, Pete. This question revolves around Blue Mountain and Cheer, two bands that I like a lot. Do you think these two bands had an impact on what we now know as heavy metal today, as much as bands like Sabbath, Zeppelin, Purple, and Uriah Heep? I think hard-hitting tunes like Summertime Blues and Mississippi Queen are almost as metallic for the time as the songs like Dazed and Confused, Iron Man, so on and so forth. Curious to know your thoughts on this." Well, like I said, I'm a fan of both these bands. You know, in the case of Blue Cheer, I mean, let's face it, that was probably, historically speaking, the first band that kind of dove into, like, really heavy music and distortion and fuzz and all that kind of stuff. That first Blue Cheer album was pretty damn heavy for its time, considering when it came out. What was that, like 67, something like that? And their second album, kind of heavy, not as heavy as the first, and then they were never a heavy band again, although put out some really good music. But their only real, truly heavy album was the first album, and a little bits of the second album. As far as Mountain goes, so Mountain kind of debuted right before, Leslie West had his first solo album called Mountain, and then he formed the band Mountain right before the Woodstock Festival in 1969. There's some really heavy tunes on that first Leslie West solo album, Mountain Climbing, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, all those albums. I mean, that's pretty heavy. The thing is, Mountain were never a huge commercial success. They had a very strong following. They sold some albums. But I think they never quite achieved the status of, a Zeppelin, a Purple, Sabbath, and so forth. But, especially here in America, Mountain were a fairly popular band. Maybe because they didn't last as long, maybe because they didn't have any real hit singles. I don't know, but I definitely think if you're going to talk about kind of the originators of heavy metal and heavy music, they're definitely up there in the top 5 or 6, and I'd throw Blue Cheer up there as well. When you really talk about it, and we had another question last week about how my top 4 originators of heavy music were all British bands. So if you were to look at like American bands and which bands kind of helped jumpstart the heavy factor here in the U.S., you've got to throw Blue Cheer and Mountain and Grand Funk Railroad for sure. Who else? On a much lower scale, Sir Lord Baltimore, right? But I think all those bands were, kind of going around at the same time. From the UK, you got Budgie as well. And then, you've got, Humble Pie and, Cactus. Cactus is another band there from the U.S., so Cactus could be considered one of those originators of heavy music in the U.S., that sort of thing. But it's a great topic. There's so many bands that kind of toiled around, and, obviously you look at a lot of people when they discuss this topic, they look at, album sales and, tours and all that kind of stuff. And so, those top 3 or 4 always seem to pop up. But yeah, Blue Cheer and Mountain, Blue Cheer especially, they were doing some stuff with fuzz and distortion kind of before anybody. Arguably Cream and Hendrix as well. But great question, a great topic. Man, you could do a whole show on the originators of like heavy music, right? Next question from Bonalong. The late 60s, early 70s had some highly influential bands. The Beatles albums Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper's were huge game changers. What do you think were some of the other influences the Beatles had on the future of rock music? Well, the Beatles kind of put like pop and rock and roll together. I think they were the first real band to actually do that and do it very successfully. You could have rock music that had ethnic influence. They brought the sitar in and all sorts of other kind of different instruments that you wouldn't normally associate with rock music, and they added them into their music. It's arguable that some of the first early prog sounds came on Beatles albums, right? And I think the Beatles popularized kind of like the rock ballad. Okay, I don't get enough credit for that. So what originally started out as kind of like a bubblegum pop band turned into a very serious rock group that brought a lot of things to the table, as well as, you had everybody in the band sung, right? you had two main singers. Harrison sung, a bit here and there. You had Ringo doing his thing. So I think the Beatles, whether you love them or hate them, most people love them, right? I like them quite a bit. They brought a lot to the table, and they kind of paved the way for a lot of other bands to kind of, again, mesh rock and pop and bring some different elements to the table. From Lisa T. Lisa, I'm wearing a Jethro Tull shirt today in honor of you. What is your opinion of Jethro Tull winning a Grammy over Metallica for best hard... Hey, quiet. For best hard rock heavy metal performance in 1989? Well, I love Tull. I'm a really huge Tull fan, okay? But that was a travesty. Come on. First of all, look at who they went up against. I think the whole, that was the first time that the Grammys had the kind of hard rock heavy metal category, okay? And their choices are real suspect. So first you had, the Crest of a Knave album by Tull, which this was a 1989 Grammy. That album came out in 87, right? So, what gives there? And then you have Metallica and Justice for All, okay, which was one of the biggest metal albums of 1988, and definitely should have won this thing, in my opinion. Then you had an Iggy Pop album. Come on, Iggy was, because he's got metal in the title of the album, does not make it a metal album. All right, Jane's Addiction. Jane's Addiction never really were a metal band, in my opinion. And then you had AC/DC Blow Up Your Video, which also came out in 1987. Not even close to one of AC/DC's best albums. And quite frankly, you had albums from Iron Maiden and all sorts of other bands that came out in 88 that should have been in the running for this Grammy Award in early 1989. So right there you have all these reasons why the list of nominees were ridiculous, okay? And then you give it to Jethro Tull, who, I like Crest of a Knave, good album. It ain't a metal album. It's barely even a hard rock album. What, because you got one song, Steel Monkey, which is kind of heavy? Cool that Tull won a Grammy, but they won it for the wrong reasons. And I don't know kind of what was going on there, but between the nominations and who actually won, the fact you had so many other great metal albums that came out in that year, 1988, what the fuck were they thinking here? All right, so yeah, just a big screw up. Happy for Tull, but they shouldn't have won that award. All right, from Jamie Laszlo. Actually, we have two similar questions here. One from Jamie Laszlo, one from John McCallar. Jamie says, when it comes to critiquing an album, are you able to put these aspects in order of importance? Songwriting, musicianship, production, vocals, and lyrics. Okay, and then John asks, hi Pete, I've been checking out some reviews on the SOT website. Good stuff. Wondering what criteria you follow, if any, when you do a review. How many listens, what do you look for, etc. What's your favorite part of reviewing new CDs, DVDs, or older ones? Okay, so for me, and let me get to John's part of the question first. So, with the Sea Tranquility webzine, you guys have to understand, we get hundreds of new releases to review. Not as many physical CDs anymore, but we do get a lot. But man, we get stuff sent via email, digital downloads and streams and all that kind of stuff from labels, from PR firms, from the bands themselves. It's just, there's no way to keep up with it and cover it all. There's absolutely no way. And, we only have a handful of folks working on the website now, as opposed to like maybe 5-10 years ago where I had like 20 writers from all over the world. So now it's just really hard to cover everything. So we just kind of stick with like maybe the more known labels that we deal with, or occasionally if something comes out that looks really interesting that's from, a unknown band or something like that, we'll do that as well. But it's really hard. So for me, between doing that and trying to do these videos and everything in my personal life and my day job, I don't have the luxury of getting a new CD and listening to it 10 times to form an opinion on it. I just don't. So basically, I usually give it a quick spin, and then I sit down and play it again, and as I'm listening to it, I do my review. So we're looking 2, maybe 3 listens max. Unless it's something like a major band that comes out with a new album, then we may listen to it a few more times. But a lot of these kind of like, unknown things that come out, marginal bands, not very well-known stuff, 2 spins, maybe 3. But, you got to understand, when I'm sitting down to review them, okay, I'm actually listening to them. I'm going through them track by track, and I'm jotting down notes, okay, on each song, what I like, what I don't like, and then I kind of put that all together. All right, so that's about as much time as I have to spend with them. And there are times, it's happened, where I go to review something, and I listen to it one or two times, and maybe I'm not crazy about it, but it's okay, and I review it. And then, after the review is already posted, so maybe I talk about it on this show here, then I go and listen to it a couple more times. All of a sudden, it starts to really grow on me a little bit more. That does happen from time to time, and it's the nature of the beast. But we just don't have the luxury of listening to one album for weeks on end before we review it. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible. And as far as what I look for, I'm not a lyric guy. I think I've mentioned this on this channel before. I don't really pay a lot of attention to lyrics. On occasion I might, and sometimes the lyrics are really truly cheesy and bad. You can tell, and I might comment on that, but I generally don't pay a lot of attention to the lyrics. Vocals for me are fairly important. So if it's like a hard rock or metal band or a prog band, it's like good vocals are kind of necessary. If the vocals are really weak, even if the musicianship is great, that kind of affects me. Same thing like in extreme metal. There are some like death and black metal bands that actually do their extreme vocals really, really well. Okay, and there are some, for me, like as far as like death metal goes, I like the growls quite a bit, but I don't like the pig grunting stuff. That just doesn't do anything for me. So like if they're doing the growling vocal thing and you can kind of understand what they're saying and it's kind of matches the music, I'm all for it. And that's what I kind of look for. So, and as far, musicianship, that's number one for me. Okay. You got to go grab me. The musicianship has to grab me. Safe, non-exciting songs that just kind of don't push any buttons for me. Just, it's got to have decent guitar work, right? Or if there's no guitars, the keyboard work has got to carry it. And again, like I mentioned, the vocals. But as far as production goes, hey, listen, I've heard a lot of great albums that really didn't have fantastic production. But you know what? If the songs, the musicianship, and the vocals are there, even if the production is kind of weak, I'm okay with that. I know there are a lot of people that listen to their music on headphones, on the best quality stereo equipment, and they nitpick about every little production value. That's never been me. It's never been me. I like a good sounding album just like anybody else. Okay, but it's sometimes you can have great songs and great performances. Production might be subpar, but you know what? The great songs are always going to rise above that. Because how many times also have you heard fantastic production, but the songs suck, right? So great production is not going to carry the whole thing. So hopefully that answered your question, guys. From Alex L. Hi, Pete. You mentioned that Stormwatch, another Jethro Tull question. You mentioned that Stormwatch is one of Jethro Tull's most underrated albums. I think that not only is Stormwatch underrated, but all the late 70s albums, Songs from the Wood, Heavy Horses, as well, are vastly underrated. And of course, I have to include Bursting Out from that same period, one of the 10 best live albums of all the 70s. If Jethro Tull's early 70s albums are worth 100%, then late 70s are worth 98%, meaning, if not equal, then very, very close. You're getting complicated, Alex. The question is, why are they underrated? In my opinion, simply because fans and critics do not think that Jethro Tull can repeat the same greatness as they did around Aqualung and Thick as a Brick, period, and did not dig them enough to realize how good they are again. What do you think? Okay, I think they're only underrated in the eyes of us loyal fans because the masses never really gravitated towards them. They're not. If you talk to any Jethro Tull loyal fan who's been following them for a long time, there's nothing underrated about those albums at all. Okay, I think out of the three you mentioned, the only one, in my opinion, that's kind of underrated because not a lot of real Tull fans talk about it is Stormwatch, and not many of the songs, if any of the songs on Stormwatch, are generally mentioned as Tull classics. However, Songs from the Wood, I think, is a very popular Tull album from both loyal fans and casual fans. And there are a number of tunes on that album that you used to hear played on the radio, that they played live, that are on greatest hits compilations, so on and so forth. Heavy Horses has a couple of them too. And, you can't really compare those three albums to, Aqualung and Stand Up and Thick as a Brick, because that was a time period in rock history where those types of albums were kind of game changers. Sold a lot of copies. They were touring stadiums, all that kind of stuff. Those tunes, most song, Aqualung and a bunch of those other Tull period albums during that period, played on the radio, okay, made up a vast majority of greatest hits compilations and all that kind of stuff. And those were considered their big albums. If you look at any band from that period, so you look at Zeppelin and Sabbath and Purple and, whatever, that's the stuff that people remember because those were the big classic rock album releases. So I think that those albums are only underrated for us loyal fans because we think that the rest of the world doesn't think they're as good as we think they are. But if you really look at them, they're not really underrated in our eyes, okay? And I think in the eyes of the casual or marginal fan of Jethro Tull, they probably don't know those albums at all. So they can't be underrated. So we're calling them underrated only because we're upset that the rest of the public doesn't accept them as the great albums that they are. That's my take on that. So hopefully that answers your question. From Maurice Gregoras. In one of your shows, you said that Boston released one of the best debut albums in the 70s. I agree, top to bottom, a great album. Yep, all killer, no filler. That prompted me to look further into Boston band members' other projects. I discovered Barry Goudreau's solo album as well as Delp and Goudreau and Return to Zero's self-titled album and Lost. I know you have the Barry Goudreau solo album. I can see it on your CD shelf. Yeah, it's sitting right over there. Do you have the others? And what is your opinion of other Boston projects? While Tom Schultz was a key to Boston, I think Barry and Brad were very important members of the band. They weren't just a one-man band. I think Barry is a solid guitar player, and in my humble opinion, Brad was in the top 10 for best rock singers ever. Also, have you ever gotten the chance to see them live? To my knowledge, they never toured Australia. Okay, so Maurice is from Australia. All right, so here's the deal. So, I like those early Boston albums. I'm a big fan of Boston in general. So I've only seen them once. Unfortunately, I never saw them back in the day. Okay, I caught them about maybe 4 or 5 years ago with the current incarnation, which has 3-4 singers all working very well together to recreate the vocals of Brad Delp and all the backing vocals. And Tom is obviously still there, and that's about it. And all these other musicians, and they were great. They were great, man. They recreated all those classic songs just perfectly. And you can say what you want. We're going to get into this in a question coming up about the fact that there's only one original member and, what that means and all that kind of stuff. But they were fantastic, and all those songs sounded exactly like I would have wanted to hear them. Would it have been nice if Brad was still around and up there and belting them out? Yeah, absolutely, because he's one of the best. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but I thought they did a great job kind of recreating all those tunes. So back to the other stuff, all right? So I'm a big fan of the Orion the Hunter album, which was the band that Barry put together right after leaving Boston. In fact, I saw them open up for Aerosmith back in 1984, and they were fantastic. That's a great album. I love the Orion the Hunter album. A lot more commercial sounding than Boston, but a lot of those kind of same hooks and things like that. The Barry Goudreau, his first solo album, is fantastic. That's basically like a Boston album, because you've got Brad sings on, I think, 60% of the songs on there. A lot of the song structures and arrangements very similar. Great album. I like those first 2 Return to Zero albums. They're good. Even more commercial. I like them probably the least of the 4 that I'm talking about here. Orion the Hunter, Barry Goudreau first solo, and the 2 RTZ albums. But I do like them. They're really good. Tons of hooks. Okay? Tons of hooks. And I think if those albums were just and again, they came out in the 80s, right, or early 90s, so you can kind of understand why they sounded the way they did. But I think if those 2 albums were a little bit heavier, man, that's like, Boston Part 2 right there. Good stuff. From Brent Uptain. Pete, do you have a favorite reissue label? And do you follow the output of any reissue label specifically? I personally find that certain reissue labels have helped guide my journey through obscure rock of the 60s and 70s, especially Esoteric Recordings, who put out masterful versions of albums I love. Jesus Christ.